The sun was slowly dipping behind the wide Arizona sky, painting the land in shades of gold and crimson. The desert stretched as far as the eye could see, quiet and endless. The air was warm and the wind moved softly across the dry ground, carrying with it the scent of sand and sagebrush. A young cowboy named Samuel rode his horse across that empty land. He was tall and strong, with sunburned skin and a calm face. His wide hat shaded his eyes from the harsh sun, and a light breeze lifted the dust behind him as the horse moved at a steady pace. Samuel had spent most of his life out here. He knew the way the desert spoke in silence. He understood how every rock and every cactus had its own place in the world. Samuel was not riding for gold or glory. He was simply traveling home after delivering a small herd of cattle to a nearby ranch. Life had taught him to enjoy quiet moments because out here, the land could change from peaceful to dangerous in a blink. As he rode through a narrow canyon, something caught his eye. At first, it was only a faint wisp of smoke. Then, as he moved closer, he noticed a small fire burned low near a cluster of rocks. And then, he saw her. Lying near the fire was a woman. She wore a simple dress made of soft brown cloth, decorated with hand-woven patterns that spoke of her people's pride and culture. Her hair, long and black as the night sky, spilled over her shoulders. Her skin was pale under the setting sun, and though her face was calm, her eyes were closed. She looked exhausted, like someone who had walked too far for too long. Samuel stopped his horse and listened. The desert was still. He climbed down slowly, careful not to make a sound. Something about the scene felt different. It wasn't danger exactly. It was a kind of sadness that hung heavy in the air. He walked toward her with quiet steps and kneeled beside her. Her breathing was soft but steady. She wasn't hurt badly, just weak. The fire told him she hadn't been here long. Next to her was a small water skin, nearly empty. She had been trying to stay alive out here alone. Samuel gently took off his hat and placed it beside him. "Miss?" he said softly, not expecting an answer. Her eyes fluttered open, dark brown eyes that held a strength he had never seen before. They stared into his, not with fear but with quiet warning, as if she were telling him without words, "I am not weak." "It's all right," he said, keeping his voice calm and slow. "I'm not here to harm you." The woman didn't speak. She just watched him. He offered her his water. For a moment she hesitated. Then slowly she reached out and took it. Her hands were steady. She drank only a little, like someone who knew how precious every drop was. Samuel could see she needed help. The desert was no place to be alone. Without asking too many questions, he lifted her carefully and helped her sit on the horse. Then he walked beside them as the animal carried her to an old line cabin, a small wooden shelter he had passed many times before. The cabin was simple. 4 walls, a roof, a small fire pit, and a rough wooden table, but it was safe. He helped her inside, gave her a blanket, and started a new fire. She sat silently, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames. The room filled with soft orange light. Samuel tried not to ask too much. Out here, people often carried stories they didn't want to tell right away. So he gave her time. He cooked a bit of beans and bread, offered her food, and only when the night grew quiet did she finally speak. Her voice was soft but steady. "My name is Ayana," she said. Her English was careful but clear. "Samuel," he replied simply. She looked into the fire as if she could see something far away. "I had a home," she began slowly. "A place where the wind sang through the trees, where the land was full of songs and stories. My people lived there for many years. It was a place of peace." Samuel listened closely. Her words came with weight, as if each one carried a piece of her heart. "One day," she continued, "men came. They took what they wanted. They left silence behind. My people were scattered. Some were gone. I ran for a long time. I didn't look back. I couldn't," she stopped. Her eyes shone in the firelight. But there was no tear, no trembling, only quiet strength. Samuel understood something then. She was not just lost. She was carrying a promise deep inside her. "I followed the river for days," she said softly. "The sun was hot. The water ran low. I thought I would fall before I ever found someone." She looked at Samuel, meeting his gaze for the first time fully. "And then you came." Samuel didn't know what to say. He wasn't a man of many words, but something inside him shifted as he listened. Ayana wasn't just telling him a story. She was sharing a part of her soul. For several days, Samuel let her rest in the cabin. He fetched water from the nearby creek, cooked simple meals, and made sure the fire never went out at night. She began to regain her strength, and little by little she told him more. Not everything, just small pieces. She told him about her father, who taught her to ride wild horses when she was a little girl. About the songs her mother used to sing at night under the stars. About the children who laughed around the fire when stories were told. Her words painted a world that was once full of love and light, but she also spoke of the day it changed. She didn't describe it in detail. She didn't need to. The silence between her sentences told Samuel more than words ever could. Every night, as the desert wind whispered outside the cabin, Samuel sat beside the fire, listening. He began to understand the weight she carried. It wasn't just pain. It was something stronger, a promise she had made to herself. One night, after a long silence, Ayanna turned toward him. The fire flickered across her face, and her eyes looked steady, almost fierce. "I made a promise," she said quietly. "I will not leave what happened in silence. I will make sure the land remembers. But I cannot do it alone." Samuel met her gaze. He had never seen someone look so strong while speaking so softly. She moved closer to the fire and held her hands near the warmth. "You helped me when you didn't have to," she said. "You brought me here. You gave me water, food, and time to breathe again." Samuel said nothing. His silence was his way of listening. Ayanna took a deep breath, then spoke slowly, clearly, and with a power that filled the small cabin. "Take my revenge," she said, "and I will be your wife forever." Her words hung in the air like a promise carved into stone. They were not spoken out of fear or desperation. They were spoken with purpose, with strength, with a fire that had not been put out by hardship. Samuel felt the weight of her words. She was not asking for pity. She was not offering love as a prize. She was binding her life to a cause she believed in. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the small window of the cabin. The desert outside was quiet, still, waiting. The stars shone above like ancient eyes watching everything unfold. In that moment, Samuel understood something about himself, too. He had always been a man who walked alone, but for the first time, he felt the pull of something bigger than himself. Over the next few days, their bond grew, not through soft words or promises of comfort, but through quiet actions. Samuel mended her worn shoes without being asked. Ayanna gathered dry branches and kept the fire strong. They didn't speak of the future, but both knew the desert had already woven their fates together. When Ayanna stood outside the cabin one morning, her hair moving gently in the wind, Samuel watched her. She looked at the land as if she were greeting an old friend. Her people had called this land home long before men like Samuel came. She belonged to it in a way he never could, but she had chosen to share her path with him, not because he was a savior, but because he had listened. That night, as the stars rose again over the canyon, Samuel saddled his horse. He didn't know exactly where the path would lead, but he knew he could no longer ride as a man with no purpose. Ayanna's words had lit a fire in him that would not fade. She watched him quietly, then stepped forward. Her eyes said everything. The wind blew softly across the desert, carrying with it the sound of quiet footsteps, two shadows moving forward into the unknown. The night was wide, but they were no longer alone. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, touching every rock and canyon with its golden light. The air was cool at first, then began to warm as the day unfolded. Samuel stood beside his horse, tightening the saddle straps, while Ayanna walked toward the edge of the small hill near the cabin. She stood tall, her long hair moving with the wind. There was a quiet strength in the way she faced the horizon. For days, Samuel had listened to her story piece by piece. Now he understood the weight of her words, the promise she had made, the path she wanted to walk. She didn't speak of hate. She spoke of justice, of memory, of standing for what was right. And Samuel, who had lived many years alone, felt something new take root in his heart. It wasn't just duty. It was something deeper, something that tied him to this woman who carried the spirit of the land itself. She turned to him, her eyes steady. "It's time," she said softly. Samuel nodded. He didn't need many words. He placed his hat low on his head, mounted his horse, and held out his hand. Ayanna stepped forward, placing her small but strong hand in his. He helped her up behind him. She held on lightly, not as someone in need of protection, but as someone ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey was long. The desert stretched out like an ocean of sand and stone. The sun rose high, and the wind carried soft whispers through the canyons. They rode in silence most of the way, letting the land speak for them. Every few miles they stopped to rest under the shade of tall rocks or near dry riverbeds. Samuel shared water, and Ayanna shared stories. Stories of her people, of the stars, of the rivers that once flowed strong. Her voice carried a warmth that made even the harsh land feel alive. Samuel listened to every word, learning not only about her world but also about himself. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with soft pink and gold, they reached a ridge that overlooked a wide valley. In the distance, Ayanna recognized familiar signs: a crooked tree near the riverbed, a line of stones placed long ago. These were places she knew well, places that once held laughter and song. She fell silent for a long moment. Samuel turned his head slightly. Her eyes were not filled with tears. Instead, they shone with something stronger than sadness: determination. "This was my home," she whispered, as if speaking to the land itself. "I remember the sound of children running here. I remember the songs at night. It's quiet now, but I can still hear them if I close my eyes." Samuel didn't interrupt. He let the wind and her memories fill the space between them. The next few days they stayed near the valley, not rushing. Samuel knew this journey wasn't just about arriving somewhere. It was about Ayanna reclaiming something inside her heart. Each morning she walked through the quiet land, touching the earth as if greeting old friends. She knelt by the riverbed and placed a small stone in her palm, whispering soft words in her native tongue. Samuel didn't understand the language, but he felt the meaning. He built a small fire every evening, and she sat across from him, speaking softly about the old ways, how her people believed the land remembered everything, how every song, every step, every word spoken here remained like a faint echo. Samuel began to see the world differently. To him, the land had always been just a place to cross, a place to work and survive. To her, it was alive. It was family. One night, under a sky full of stars, she spoke again of her promise. "Samuel," she said gently, "I told you I would bind my life to yours if you helped me. But this is not about anger. I want the world to remember my people. I want what was broken to be named, not forgotten." Samuel watched her carefully. The stars reflected in her dark eyes, and in that moment she seemed like a part of the night itself, strong, endless, and full of quiet light. He didn't make big promises. He simply nodded, and in his heart, he made his own silent vow. He would stand with her not because of duty, but because it felt right. They spent days speaking with others who lived near the valley, traders, ranchers, and travelers who passed through. Samuel asked questions. Ayanna listened closely. They found people who knew what had happened to her people who were willing to speak the truth. Slowly, like pieces of a puzzle, the story came together. Not loud, not rushed, but steady. Through it all, Samuel never spoke of revenge in harsh tones, and Ayanna never used words of bitterness. They moved with quiet strength like the wind through the canyons. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. In time, their quiet efforts brought attention to the valley. A kind rancher offered a small patch of land where Ayanna could build something of her own. Others, men and women who respected her quiet strength, offered to help. What had once been silent land began to breathe again. Samuel helped build a small wooden house by the riverbed. Ayanna gathered stones, clay, and wood, her hands working with skill and care. Together, they built not just a home, but a place where memories could live again. At night, they would sit on the porch watching the stars above them. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't need to. The land itself seemed to speak for them. Samuel began to feel a warmth in his chest he had never felt before. For years, he had wandered without purpose. Now every day had meaning. Ayanna's promise was no longer just words from that night in the cabin. It had become their shared journey. As time passed, more travelers came to the valley. Some came out of curiosity, others to offer help. Ayanna would tell them stories of the people who once lived here. The songs, the dances, the traditions. She taught children to sing old songs, to respect the land, to remember what once was. Her voice became the heartbeat of the valley. Samuel stood by her side through every step. He worked the land, built fences, cared for the animals. But more than that, he listened. He learned how to see the world through her eyes. One evening, a group of families gathered by the river. Ayana lit a small fire. The wind was soft, the stars bright. She stood before them, not as someone broken, but as someone who had rebuilt herself with quiet strength. She spoke about hope, about the way a single memory can keep a whole culture alive. Samuel watched her speak. In that moment, he understood why she had looked him in the eye that night and made her promise. It was never about fighting. It was about keeping something precious alive. She walked toward him after the gathering. The firelight danced across her face. She reached for his hand. "Samuel," she said softly, "I made you a promise. I said I would be your wife if you walked this road with me. You have walked every step." Samuel held her hand gently. He wasn't a man of fancy speeches. He only smiled. A quiet, real smile. In the weeks that followed, the valley became a place of peace again. Ayana and Samuel were joined in a simple ceremony by the river. It wasn't a grand event, but it was beautiful. The wind carried their words. The water shimmered in the sunlight, and the land seemed to hum with quiet joy. They built their life together, not out of wealth, but out of shared strength. Ayana tended to the home and shared her stories with anyone who would listen. Samuel worked the land with steady hands, always close by her side. They planted small gardens, raised horses, and welcomed travelers who came through. Many came only for a night, but left with stories they would remember for a lifetime. In the cool evenings, they sat together outside their home. Samuel would lean back in his chair, hat tipped low, while Ayana watched the stars. She often sang soft songs in her language, songs that spoke of the river, the wind, and the people who came before. The world changed slowly around them. The desert didn't become less harsh, but it became a place of meaning. Their story spread beyond the valley, carried by travelers who spoke of the cowboy and the Apache woman who turned pain into hope. And through it all, Samuel never forgot the first night she looked at him by the fire and said those words. He understood now that her promise had been more than a vow of love. It had been a call to build something lasting. Years passed, and the valley grew richer with stories. Children played where silence once lived. Songs filled the nights again. Ayana and Samuel grew older together, their bond only growing stronger. Their love was not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that lives in the air, in the soil, in the way two people choose to walk side by side. And on the soft wind that moved across the desert, their story lived on. It was a story not of hatred, but of memory. Not of darkness, but of light. Ayana had found her way home, and Samuel had found something far greater than he had ever expected. He had found a purpose, a partner, and a place to belong. Their promise was kept. Not in words carved on stone, but in every tree they planted, every song they shared, and every quiet night spent together beneath the stars.